is. That's a good thing.
Just seriously, we can figure out. If we don't turn it off, it'll just run all night.
Well, just unplug it.
That's right. We know how to do that.
That's true. That's right. I'll play it by ear. Okay, I'm here tonight to talk to you about Communities for All Ages. Just wanted to touch base with you. I brought a prop. This is our silver recognition level that we received in 2016 in April. And just wanted to touch base because it's time again for us to apply for our next level of recognition, which is the gold level. And again, the Communities for All Ages program is designed to just assess and evaluate how well our service delivery is accommodating people of all ages and abilities. It's an ongoing process. It's something that's supported by a resolution passed by our council that we are a community for all ages and that we support these values and want to do the best that we can. We have achieved the bronze level, which was awareness, which included a lot of presentations to discuss the problem, or not problem, but the demographic trends that are coming, the needs that we foresee cities needing to deal with in the future, and kind of just bringing it all top of mind, educating staff, making presentations to boards and commission members, city council, etc. Silver includes the assessment phase, which is just a run through using the tool that was evaluated through the program, which is the Communities for All Ages checklist, that talks about topics under 6 different kind of service delivery categories. The Sustainability Commission took that on, walked through the assessment, gave Commission kind of a score. Staff did the same type of work. It's not a penalty or punitive in any way, it's just a check-in, kind of establishing your baseline a bit. The gold level is implementation phase. That requires the community that's going for gold recognition to have incorporated Communities for All Ages values and language into a plan of some type, into kind of the guiding documents of the organization. So we'll be applying for gold based on the work that was done in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan last year, where there's lots of accessibility language and language aimed toward making our parks work for all people. So we'll be going with that, as well as all of the work that we continually do in kind of all different areas, just in terms of maintenance and sort of striving for those improvements across the board. 2 key ones that we've included are adding the youth members to our commissions. Now we have 4 new students in place and ready to go on both our Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission and our Sustainability Commission. And then just adding the item that you always see on our City Council agenda items, where staff is always checking in and broadcasting how each agenda item is going forward to a City Council meeting, takes into account the Communities for All Ages sort of lens, and how the work that we are proposing through those agenda items will serve our public. So we're ready to apply. The application's due November 1st. Yes.
Do we have an opportunity to showcase some of our great work through photographs? We have so many events that span all the ages of this community, from babies to 90 and 100-year-olds, and it would be great to have all those pictures showcased, I would think.
I agree. Yeah, the Mid-America Regional Council will, when we achieve gold, they'll provide us kind of with a little press kit. They'll be wanting us to really toot our horn about the award as well, and I think that would be excellent. And actually, the Sustainability Commission at their meeting on Monday, to help me with the application, they sort of did a check-in with the checklist since they did the original assessment, and communication was a big piece of it, and just sort of what we do, talking about it more, develop communication plans, and for sure we're reaching all kinds of folks, and I think that can be a really natural emphasis going
I've got
forward.
a whole litany of pictures on my phone that I need you to download.
Yep, no, perfect. I mean, it's true, we do so much, and that's the thing.
You do, Debbie.
When we make lists of what we're doing, and kind of, it's all there, and that's, I think that's kind of key to the program, is that it was never meant to, to achieve this, you have to do all of this new stuff. It just means to be taking into account and keeping it top of mind, and celebrating what you do and reaching more people with it. So, yeah.
Once we achieve the gold level, then is that something you have to redo annually, or?
Yeah, the program kind of they call it a committee for lack of a better word. The communities that are participating in Communities for All Ages meet every other month or so, and they're talking about now developing kind of their maintenance program that's kind of the step after the gold, because they do have communities reaching this point now. And I think it's kind of sort of a member in good standing kind of a method where you would be checking back in, maintaining your status, showing the support since your last application and ongoing. So that's kind of in the works about what it would require to maintain that status, but I think if we keep participating at the level that we are now, that will be easily achievable.
Kind of overseen by the MARC, but is it also nationwide, or is it
it's becoming more. It's a bit of a pioneer program, but there are more programs in around the country that feel this type of way than when we started in 2013. But we're really talking about it. I mean, they're going to conferences and things and sharing the checklist and speaking at conferences and working with AARP. And
so it was developed here by MARC?
The checklist certainly was, and at that time we didn't have a model really to work from. So yeah, it feels pretty neat. Great. Okay.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
You guys told them because I didn't.
No, happy birthday.
Additional lights.
Happy birthday
to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that's way long.
I'm not a soprano.
Any department updates, Laura?
We do have a few. I just wanted to let you know that there, in case you hear about it, there was a small fire apparently in the kitchen of the Peanut this afternoon. We had a Facebook post that said, yeah, I know. So a lot of smoke, which spread to some of the other businesses. No injuries. The fire marshal was investigating late this afternoon, but it does appear to be accidental. And he'll be meeting with the owners in the morning. So they had Consolidated Fire District number 2 had some help from Overland Park and our police department. But I think just minor, but you may see, there was a Facebook post, which is kind of how we became aware of it earlier today. So that, and then John has a couple of updates on some of the construction projects, if you would, and then Christy's got just a few on Community Center.
I have a few, so I'm going to go through one by one, so feel free to stop me if you have any questions. First, Fox Ridge Drive. The contractor is wrapping up the stormwater work, so all the underground work will be done later this week. They will be finishing up concrete flat work next week and anticipate paving the week after that. So that project's moving right along. Sidewalks are all the way through on the east side. And being out there and watching that, it's absolutely amazing to see how many people are using the sidewalks already. So
I saw it, it's awesome. Can I have a question on that? You know, it's quite a bit narrower now. Some folks at those apartments used to park in the street. Are we still going to, is there going to be no parking?
no street parking.
Okay. I assume that because it's dramatically narrower when you go down it.
Yeah, it is. A few things. To gain that extra space for that sidewalk, we narrowed that street. Also, the vast majority of that through there is residential because it's all apartment buildings. Again, and standing out there, it's amazing how fast people go down Fox Ridge, especially when it was so wide. So we're hoping that it slows them down a little bit. You know, it's Don Street parking before, I think, was a lot of more out of convenience, just because you park on the street and your unit's a little bit closer. And talking to Danielle, it sounds like the apartments have more than plenty of parking for everybody to park in. So I think it was more of a convenience thing. For us, it was kind of hard with snow plowing activities when we'd go through there and everybody would be parked along the street there. But, so I think it's going to help a lot of things. Maybe a little bit further of a walk to some units, but I think it'll be a good thing overall.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Second, traffic signal at Woodson and Johnson Drive. They have boarded the conduit on the north and east side. They were finishing up the south run yesterday. And I've got that about 75% complete. And then they will have to run the conduit to the power south down on Woodson to the power pole. So far, so good. Everything's gone rather well. They will get the conduit in, do the bases and the restoration and all that, and then they will be, there'll be a little bit of a lag for the poles and arms to show up. But when they do, they will correct those and
They go pretty quick.
yeah, putting the poles up isn't really a huge deal. There is a turn-on sequence when the traffic signal goes live. There's kind of a procedure that they do where it flashes yellow for a certain period of time and to let everybody know that a new signal is going to be there. So we'll go through that and get that going. Finally, mill and overlay. The flat work for the mill and overlay streets is starting to wrap up. They still have a few areas to install ADA ramps. They were over on Roland Drive yesterday installing those 4 ramps. They will move over to Broadmoor and 61st Street next, and then a small ramp on Horton. Looking to mill and pave those streets in the middle of this month. So everything is moving along nicely.
Hey John, I have a question.
Yeah.
How about the dead tree in Countryside on the right of way there? What?
That is a KDOT tree.
I know it is, but you said you were going to talk to KDOT about it, and I wondered.
We've talked to them, and they.
July 20.
We actually have a
28th.
KDOT tree watch going.
You're kidding.
We talked to them on the end of July. They said that they were waiting on the chipper, and that tree is still standing. So they are aware of it.
Aren't there 2 or 3 in there?
There's one that's really bad.
There's more than one.
But
There is more than one.
Yeah.
There's one specifically they've agreed is their responsibility to take down. The rest of them we'll see if they get out there, but yes.
So they are aware of it. They
Okay,
said
and then
that they
there's
would
that
take care
one
of it.
dead tree on Lamar right there at 61st Terrace on the east side. It's Lamar, between 61st and 61st Terrace.
Okay.
And you remember we had a dead tree by O'Doyle's and it fell over and fell on the police car? Those branches keep falling, so I'm hoping that, I don't know whether that's on the right of way or whether that's on private property, but
That would be a private property
that
issue.
concerns me a little bit.
So we will
Those
pass that
branches
along
aren't
to
growing stronger.
James and Neil.
Now, is Johnson Drive and Broadmoor, where those big AT&T or whatever, that's part of this year's mill and overlay, is that
Yes,
correct?
they are
Okay.
going to repave those 2 lanes in that intersection to get rid of the washboard effect that you have driving through there.
And when are you doing the post office for the cross people?
They were going to do it after they got done with the Roland Drive ramps, which would have been the end of this week, beginning of next week, but rains probably got them backed up some. So they'll get those finished up and then they'll be moving over there. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
Just a quick update on the parking lot. Of course, I think anytime.
I got one too. I didn't see
I
you.
think I was going to drink my soda.
Oh.
Wait a minute. I like you and all,
I wouldn't do that.
What are you guys? What's going on?
but
Promise I bought my own.
anyway, of course, the weather, it seems like, always plays havoc with us. We went for so long without any rain, which we could have done the parking lot during that time and had it done in 3.5 days, but of course the rain's slowing us down. We did get some asphalt, about half of the first layer of asphalt in the south parking lot today. I don't know if they'll be there tomorrow. John, can you do asphalt on top of that after it's rained this much?
No, not really.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, right now.
yeah, so we're probably pushing another week. Our 3 weeks just turned into 6. And so we'll be probably looking at 6 weeks to do the south lot, then we'll hop into the north lot and then the west lot, so. And as I've tried to tell everybody at the community center, the north lots and the west lots will be a lot easier because the south lot, of course, was a complete tear-out reconstruction. The north lot is just a mill and overlay, and then the west lot is just a reseal of that, so. And then also, if you haven't been in the community center in the last week, I think you're going to be really surprised when you walk in. We, the full-time professional staff, took a tour of 4 different community centers in the metro area and kind of tried to look at ways that we could kind of spruce it up, and we've decided to do some different colors. And so Brian, with his keen eye for everything, has painted the entranceways into each of the meeting rooms the same gray color that is in the conference center, and then he's used the teal that was in the aquatic center to paint a stripe on it. And he has new big letters indicating each of the rooms, so you no longer look at that little 5x5 or whatever, and you can, thank you, yeah, you can look down you can stand at the conference center hallway, look down, and you see room C, room D, room the same way at the other
Is
side.
there anything he could do?
I haven't found it yet, but
He is amazing.
I'll keep looking. He does.
You'll love this. I got an email today wanting to know about the parking lot at the community center was at a city expense. So I thought maybe you'd found a little white bubble fairy that's going to pay for this or something.
I keep looking. I'm looking for that at the same time I'm looking for something Brian can't do.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll let you know if I find either.
All right, thanks, Christy.
Thank you.
Anything else?
The only other last thing is you may see Johnson County Wastewater started the first of this week to do their sanitary sewer main repairs there behind the Rolling Court townhomes. So they expect that work will take about 20 days. So there's some traffic detours and road closures there on Roland Drive so they can access the property. And that's all I have.
All right, then that concludes the community development team.
Emily's still here.
Emily's still here.
Emily.
Just switching you over.
Okay, and then we
She's a
leave,
trooper.
please.
Do we want to jump right in there to the finance and admin? Let's jump. All right.
Yes.
I'm not allowed
Might as
to
well
jump or
jump.
run.
Go ahead.
Go on this side. My husband says no jumping or running.
I'll call order our Finance and Admin Committee for Wednesday, April 4th. Got a few action items to go through here as these get passed out. First one is our Gateway Development Update. And Bruce.
And Bruce, yes.
Sit faster than me.
I'm going to stand and then I'm going to sit. I'm not going to stand for very long. So.
That sounds good.
Back in September, we kind of sat down and talked about the Gateway project and started with kind of a question about whether or not we shared a common goal with the developer, and I think came to some agreement that we did, that it's in all of our best interest to sort of complete the entire development according to the approved plan as quickly as possible in order that both the city and the developer could receive some mutual benefits from that. So since that meeting, we have been working on looking at a variety of different financial scenarios based on the request for incentives, negotiating, exchanging drafts of redevelopment agreements, and starting to think about the ordinance creating the community improvement district and the resolution of intent to issue the IRBs. So last month we sort of wrapped up the EPC project, so many of these same component pieces apply in our consideration of the Gateway request. One of the new pieces, the different pieces than EPC for the Gateway is the introduction and the application of the Community Improvement District. So I just wanted to kind of roughly run through again as we kind of hopefully get close to some final conversations and some decisions about this project, the tools that have been requested, and where we are in terms of our negotiations with each. So the Community Improvement or CID District imposes an additional 1% retail sales tax on goods and services within the district, which is currently proposed to encompass the Gateway site. If enacted, the CID District would begin in 2019. It would have a 22-year life cycle. The tax rate, sales tax rate admission currently is 9.6%. You can kind of see a breakdown. 6.5% of that is the state of Kansas, 1.475 is the counties, and 1.625 is the city of Missions. So the CID within the gateway would add an additional 1%, bringing that new sales tax rate within the district to 10.6%, making it equal to the sales tax rate that's charged currently at Mission Crossing and in our Cornerstone Commons development. So we do have 2 existing CID districts where that 10.6 sales tax rate is being charged.
Isn't there a state requirement that you can't go over 10% without some, there's a threshold, I thought, that you couldn't go beyond a sales tax that you had to get?
So the city's general sales tax, we can't exceed 2% in our general sales tax authority. Well, our total sales tax, either general or dedicated sales taxes. And then within the CID, there is the developer of the CID, associated with the CID, could request up to 2% in most cases, and in this case, they request an additional 1%. And then upon approval, the plan has been, I know we've had several questions of these along the way, there are 2 existing CID districts on the site, 1 and 2 for the gateway, and those would be dissolved with approval of the CID district number 3, which would apply that 1% rate consistently across all of the businesses there. Again, the developer's request.
Didn't we already do that?
You had the public hearing
Yeah,
on the CID.
Yeah.
You haven't. So the last piece and kind of closing the loop on the CID as a part of this process will be actually enacting an ordinance, which will put
So we had to
the
wait so many days.
CID in place and dissolve the other 2. Contemplating the use of the industrial revenue bonds, or IRBs, which provides that sales tax exemption to the developer on the purchase of construction materials, furnitures, and finishings. That is a special limited obligation, and the city has no financial responsibility for repayment of the industrial revenue bonds. And those bonds, what we would be doing at this stage of the process is just passing a resolution telegraphing our intent to issue those, and then we would come back at a later date and actually go through that bond issuance process. The redevelopment project plan, you may recall this was similar to the EPC project. So once a district is created, then a specific project plan within that district is submitted and reviewed. We've held a public hearing on that. It's gone to the Planning Commission. They have found the plan in conformance with the city's comprehensive plan. So at the last step in that process, we'll be moving that to the council. The TIF project plan must be adopted by ordinance, and it does require a 2/3 majority vote of the governing body to accomplish that. So 6 of 9 votes. And then the redevelopment agreement, which is often kind of goes hand in hand, which is really the document that captures and controls all the terms of our deal. So it will talk about specific project budgets, project schedule, the obligations of the developer and the city, the process for certifying and reimbursing eligible expenses, requirements that we may want to impose on the transfer or sale of the property, and events of default and remedies. This will be the controlling document for the, as I mentioned, the terms of this deal, and this is the place where we would address the payment or bringing current any delinquent property taxes, special assessments, or fees. And then going forward, if those were not paid, those would trigger an event of default under a redevelopment agreement, and the city would have a mechanism to pursue those.
Are we current on property taxes?
They are not current. The same situation. They anticipate bringing those current with the issuance of the financing for phase 1 of this.
Prior to our approval of this?
It would not be prior to your approval of this.
Well, that's the
You can
big-
try, Debbie.
Well,
But they won't be able to proceed with anything unless they
right.
do.
Everything would shut down. if
Everything
they
would
didn't
shut
pay.
down if they don't pay. So the deal can be approved with a trigger and that requirement
Right.
of making sure those are current. I think we talked about in a previous work session that his lender is not going to finance a deal in which the taxes are delayed either. So sort of multiple hooks there to bring those current. So, you know, what through the process have we been talking about? What have we factored into our negotiations, our considerations, and our conversations with the developers? We've always looked at and talked about sort of those project elements which are extraordinary costs, those things that may either be caused by the fact that this is a development a redevelopment, so redevelopment challenges related to the site, related to, in this case, stormwater and storm floodplain issues. So they can be redevelopment challenges, or they can be expenditures associated with the project that are sort of triggered by the city's request for various components which help meet our vision. So a parking structure, for example, in order to improve density or achieve higher levels of density within a project. We look at redevelopment and increased economic activity that may be generated by any project. We look at new revenues that may be coming into the city, development fees, dedicated sales taxes, franchise fees. And we look at kind of striking the appropriate balance for legacy costs between both the city and the developer. This project has been around for many, many years, and both the developer and the city have incurred costs as a result of that. So part of our need to share in that resource allocation as we move forward. And we've talked a lot about, and I think it became central to some of our conversations with EPC, was the need to have resources available throughout the term of the development agreement, so that the city is not waiting until the end of a 20 or 22-year period to start receiving financial benefits or economic benefits specifically off of that project. And I think for many reasons, as we've talked about, and you all have articulated on a number of occasions, looking down the road and understanding that with that development comes added pressures on the delivery of many of our public services, public safety, public works, parks and recreation, and we need to have the ability to be able to respond not only to our existing residents, but to be able to provide and support any new development, whether it's the Gateway or others, in a way that continues to promote that investment in our community. So that's certainly something that has been central to the conversation with EPC, is central, will remain central to the conversation with the Gateway developer in terms of how we share and allocate those resources over time. So where kind of are we on our basic deal points? As we've kind of talked in previous meetings, and right now, generally, the developer's request was for 100% of the TIF property tax revenues, 100% of the 1% sales TIF revenues, 100% of the transient guest tax revenues. Transient guest tax rate is 9% over the life of the project. As we look at that, as we've talked about, and Bruce has broken down on many occasions how we approach a project and our participation in that. As we initially looked at that, working off of some basic deal points of providing the developer with 100% of the requested CID. That's really not money. That's an additional tax that they're layering on themselves that can only be spent within that district. So that seems like the most logical pot of money, if you will, to contribute to the project. So right now we're looking at a deal that would be predicated on 100% of that 1% CID over the maximum 22-year term, beginning in 2019 with a portion being pledged to the Phase 1 pay-as-you-go note, then to the special obligation bonds, and then finally to the tails. 100% of the project area's property TIF over a maximum 20-year term, similarly, and that IRB sales tax exemption. When we look at kind of the net result of all of those and looking at some internal rates of return, and Bruce can talk in more detail about this, there is certainly a gap that is still identifiable in the developer financing. So that sort of leads us into that conversation about, is it appropriate to look at additional resources in terms of the general sales tax and the transient guest tax that could be allocated or shared during those time periods. The next two slides and sheets, and I apologize that they're small, but what I really am just trying to illustrate here is, without any sharing or shared allocation of the transient guest tax and the 1% TIF sales tax, this will give you kind of a snapshot of what kind of the base revenues that would be generated by this project over the life of the term. So you look at what would be coming back to the city Under any scenario, any level of participation, is the base property taxes, which is about $46,000 a year. The city portion of the county sales tax, which varies over time, but as you can see, never tops out at more than about $15,000 a year. The big drivers here for the city currently are the dedicated sales taxes that we have, because those sales taxes would not be pledged to the project. So you're looking at a 1/4 cent street and a 3/8 cent Parks and Recreation sales tax. So you can see in the early years of this project that those taxes are really benefited and supplemented by additional sales tax being generated by the Gateway project. What I've shown in the first slide is if those are not renewed for some reason, those aren't guaranteed. So we're within our 10-year window or sunset period. So the 1/4 cent street sales tax will sunset in 2022, and the Parks and Recreation will sunset in 2023. And then we have to put in the time and the effort and the legwork to get those renewed. The next page shows you the financial benefit to us if we go through that process, and we'll look at that. So you look at the difference between about $3.4 million over the course of a 20-year period if the sales taxes are renewed. That number turns into about $15 million. So there's some real incentive, and I think it's a tool that we will want to use regardless of our participation in the Gateway project in looking at getting that sales tax renewed. But that generates some really important revenues and resources to allow us to continue to address street needs and or our needs on the Parks and Recreation side. And certainly those sales taxes at renewal would not have to be renewed at those same rates. So you could look at some changes there. Yes?
The sales tax that you're showing would just be coming from the property itself.
That would be in addition to, for example, about $500,000 that we're currently generating in street sales tax and about $800 in Parks and Recreation. So this is additional new on top of those base allocations.
So I'm just saying that if you add another 1-something million on there for another 20 years, that really makes a big difference. Getting both of those taxes renewed, we need to definitely work on that. I'm sorry we have a sunset on at least one of them.
And so that's really just designed to show that without some other participation, there's not a lot of revenue that comes into the city off of this base project over that 20-year period. So what's left to decide? I'm going to turn it over to Bruce at this point and let him talk a little bit more kind of numbers and next steps with you.
Just real quick, was there any discussion about a higher CID rate on the property at all? Trying to use that as a way to...
There hasn't been, to my understanding. A lot of the retail tenants and food and beverage tenants, entertainment tenants that they've been talking with will have, upper limits or concerns about going too high on the sales tax. Even though the research about how much it deters shoppers or consumers is actually pretty limited, but in any case, I think they felt constrained to not really push the limit on the CID. All right. So what is it to decide? We're actually making good progress. So as Laura mentioned, the clicker here, the development team has requested basically 100% of the 1% general sales tax as well as the 9% transient guest tax for the full 20-year term. So in other words, they wanted to suck that up as part of the overall TIF incentive along with the property tax TIF for the full maximum 20-year term. But as Laura alluded, we've identified that there's really an immediate benefit to the city of capturing some amount of one or both of those taxes for both general purposes as well as perhaps for economic development and marketing. And in light of waiting potentially for tails to come after bond financing gets wrapped up, it really doesn't align with the city's interest to do that. We think it really makes sense to have a defined allocation that is really remaining with the city for city purposes, and then that actually gives the developer more incentive to make sure that their bond financing is as efficient as possible on those special obligation bonds, and then they can then close down that bond financing and move on to tails as quickly as possible. So I think the city team feels pretty strongly about going with that route as opposed to waiting toward the end for some undefined benefit. Transient guest tax, as you probably know, has restrictions on how it can be spent, and I really want to make clear that the base of generation here is just the hotel rooms. So you think about the proposed hotels, they're going to have restaurants, they're going to have room service, other events and things like that, ballroom events and so on. All of the sales relating to those activities, other than people actually, staying in a room, are not going to be subject to transient guest tax, but would be subject to sales tax. Everything at a hotel would be subject to sales tax, but the layering on of the transient guest tax is just for the 200 estimated rooms.
Well, how do you figure that out? First, how much that would come to?
Yeah, we've run some numbers on that.
Okay.
Yep. Quite a few numbers, actually.
Well, I'm just very vague. I don't think they should get all the transient guests, and I'm going to hold out for that. So I think we need to come up with something for us.
Yep. And the sales tax really is more flexible and generates more than the transient guest tax, because even though the transient guest tax is at 9% and the sales tax is at 1%, it's a much bigger base, right? It's all the retail, all the food and beverage, and so on. And of course, it can be used for pretty much any corporate purpose of the city, including some things that you might really consider to be more in the domain of transient guest tax. So we're discussing different allocations of both with the development team. I guess from the city's perspective, the other thing I would mention is that maybe focusing a little bit more on sales tax, not saying that we wouldn't be looking for an allocation of the transient guest tax to stay with the city, but focusing more on sales tax diversifies your risk more as well. You're drawing from a larger base, not putting as many eggs in the basket of counting on the hotel having high occupancy, high sales. Again, it's not an either or, but those are some of the considerations that we're thinking about as we think about what's in the city's best interest going forward. And so we have, over the last several days, looked at multiple scenarios, different levels of allocation, and we did discuss a specific allocation proposal with the development team earlier today, as well as some other considerations that impact the overall viability of their deal. I won't show you all of my spreadsheets yet, but we've got many spreadsheets on the development budget and the operating pro forma, and there's, in addition to the incentives that you may or may not provide, there's a lot of other levers, right, in their deal that make the deal look better or worse. And so we've been talking about those, and I think we've got most everything really well nailed down, but there are still a few areas where the city team and I will want to make sure that we really have as much information as possible, more information, such as on their financing for their bank financing, for instance, before we come to you with a final set of recommendations. So we're negotiating, we're doing a little bit more final due diligence on some of their numbers relating to the project and the financing, but I think we're moving in a positive direction.
Well, and I think, understanding that the developer came through the door with a request for 100% of the revenues, I think the response and the reaction recently has been, I think it was very positive today. I think in an understanding of, we understand that that's not on the table, and so we weren't spending any time arguing about putting that 100% request back on the table. They're really going to go back and do some, I think, hard looking at some of the areas that we discussed with them today. So I think we were all encouraged. Again, I think that gets us back to, that common goal. I mean, it's in their best interest to get this project done, and it's in our interest to get it, the right project done for the city for the long term. So I was encouraged by just kind of that reaction and response in those discussions today. So we will continue, as Bruce said, to work through those, and kind of keeping what we've heard your goals and objectives to be through that process as we hopefully come back with that final recommendation.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate something that Laura touched on. It's of course important to the developer what level and structure of incentives you're willing to provide, assuming you're willing to participate at some level. But it's almost as important, if not really more important, for you guys to be in the game, period, right? Because without some level of TIF and CID and IRB participation, their deal really does have an insurmountable gap. And so we've identified that, they recognize that. It's not to say that they can just accept anything that we might throw their way. I think they have raised some good concerns or legitimate concerns about how much more additional equity they have to put into this project to make it real. That's what developers do, they put in equity. So I'm not saying, oh, poor them, but that's a real consideration. Where is that equity going to come from? How is it going to get paid back? And I think we'll have some good candid discussions about that, but then also taking another look at some of these development costs that probably can be fine-tuned a little bit more to bring down the overall cost of the project. So, yeah, I think, Tom.
I mean, a stupid question. Is there an end in sight? I mean, are we going to be able to go there?
I think you should say that.
Are you
segue to the next
I'd like
slide?
to do something
Yes.
before the end of this year.
I thought you just wanted to see me every couple of weeks.
I'm tired of Minnesota people.
Oh, we just lost last night. It's still raw.
Oh, yeah, that was tough.
So, Laura, do you want to talk about the dates ahead of us?
So I think just in terms of some timing and coordination and schedules, which I'll touch on a little bit later in the meeting as well. What we'd like to do, I think we're really going to dig in the rest of this week, early next week, to be able to get something to you and hopefully kind of reach some agreement with the developer so we can get that out publicly. I would anticipate that maybe we have a short work session ahead of our October 18th City Council meeting to kind of review those details, ask those questions. If you're ready at that point to take action on the 18th, we can. If not, then I would suggest that we look at a special City Council meeting in advance of our committee meeting on November 1st. The mayor's out of town on the 25th of October, which would be the next sort of logical Wednesday after the 18th, but he will be out of town for that meeting. So that's kind of, yes, and we talked with the developer today. I think we'd all like to, if we can get there, get this wrapped up sooner rather than later. They'd like to be able to, look at if we do have a deal, getting their financing in place and moving forward with the next steps.
One other thing that you'll hear some discussion on is roles and responsibilities and triggers and various mechanisms in the development agreement. And Pete Heaven has done a nice job of identifying for us on our side what he sees as some of the key points still to be hashed out with the developer's attorneys. The deal points are understandably first and foremost, right? Everyone wants to get to an understanding on how these tools will or won't be used and the limits on that. But there are some other elements that will also need to be negotiated, and we'll be going through those with you on the 18th.
And I did forget to mention we were looking at those revenues. So anything that we're talking about in terms of sharing would be on top of the revenues, that kind of those base revenues, and on top of the repayment of the $12 million of stormwater debt that we've carried over the last several years.
So the assessment would stay in place as is current, and all these numbers, assuming that these are reauthorized, would go in addition to allocated 1% general sales tax and some portion of the TGT.
So I'm feeling really optimistic that we're going to be able to, and I'm serious, get a development agreement to vote on by November.
Yes,
I am too.
I would agree.
Yeah, we're right there. I'm feeling good about it.
Another stupid question.
No such.
We've heard about all this development buildings and all that, has there ever been anything discussed about maybe the city of fountains and anything with art projects that they can throw in here, put a fountain on the corner, make it pretty when people are driving by on Johnson Drive, or there's never any talk of that?
Oh, we've gone down the mountain route. We did that in year one.
Did you, wasn't here, wasn't born then?
He said it was.
So-
It's a great idea.
It's not too late to add some of
It's
those
great.
to things in, and we can certainly go back and look at some of the components. I don't think there's a fountain. I think there's some Johnson Drive design guidelines and standards which have obviously been applied to the project, but we can go back and look at ways to make that a signature
New
development.
statues.
Maybe a large
There you go.
hologram of Tom Garrity welcoming people to the city.
Giving coffee.
In seriousness, Brian and others have done a nice job of looking at surrounding infrastructure and making sure that we've got that squared away in one way or shape or form, and I think we'll be doing more of that as well in negotiating the development agreement, just to make sure there aren't any unpleasant surprises where the city says, well, I thought the developer was taking care of that, and they get to say, I thought the city was taking care of that. That, I think, is pretty well buttoned up, but we'll make sure it's all the way. That's all. Anything else?
I've seen all those spreadsheets you've done. Really appreciate the work that you put into this. I can't imagine how you'd like to pull your hair out sometimes working on this, and I'm sure you have other jobs going too, so we really appreciate all the hard work that's put in. I think you're doing us a good job here with the negotiating on this too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll stick around for the rest of your agenda if you have questions afterwards.
Well, next up on the agenda, we have an update on the selection of auditors for the city's financial annual audit. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As you all know, Kansas State statutes require an annual audit of the city's financial statements. The audit is conducted in accordance with generally accepted accounting practices, Governmental Accounting Standard Board, and the Kansas Municipal Audit Guidelines. One of the fundamental standards for the audit is that it be conducted by an independent third party. So we have been utilizing the firm of Mice Hauser probably since year one, it seems like, but at least the last 12 years. We do this kind of on a 4-year cycle. So the last time we went out for bids for audit services would have been in 2013. So we're up for another cycle. This summer we put together a request for qualifications, sent that out. We received 4 proposals back. All qualified auditing firms that do this kind of work for other cities and governmental agencies in the metropolitan area. We reviewed the proposals, we called references, and then we asked each of the firms to come in for interviews. So we met with them on a one-on-one basis. And I say we, that was myself and then our county manager, Debbie Long. So that was the team that worked in this process. We're recommending the selection of the accounting firm Burbridge and Tehran and Company. They have performed audits such as this for other municipalities in Kansas, similar in size and operations to us. They've been around for quite a while, so they have quite a bit of experience. Some of the reasons why we're selecting this firm, first of all, they received very good references when we call the references. And in fact, one reference I called for another firm recommended them actually. So yeah, they're very highly spoken of with other finance directors and accounting staff in the area. They are not the least expensive firm, but we're not really necessarily looking for the least expensive firm. And I will say that, again, we did a request for qualifications. So we're really looking for the best firm that can meet our needs. And expenses was kind of the last consideration. And we actually requested sealed bids to be brought to the interview. And the firm came for the interview. And we went through and did our evaluation, and then we opened up the bids. So the cost was actually the least consideration, even though that is kind of rated high on our score sheet. We're really looking for the best firm. And one of the things that attracted us to them was the fact that they are providing more hours. And sometimes as staff members, we don't want to have the auditors here more than they have to be. But I think there's some benefit to that. They're going to provide about 300 hours for the total audit. They're actually going to come in here and spend about a week and a half or so on site conducting the audit. So it's going to be a lot more interaction with the staff and the auditors. We'll be available to answer questions. We can deal with issues that come up face-to-face as opposed to exchanging emails and phone calls. That's been a little bit of a struggle in the past, especially with some of the younger auditors that are not quite as experienced with governmental accounting, kind of trying to figure out what is it they're asking for, and struggling to sort of get an answer back to them. We sit down and have a face-to-face discussion with them, see what they're looking at, and quickly answer the question. It'd be a much more efficient process.
I did notice that we had a budget amount of $25,000 and their bid came back at $27,000. Where's the difference coming in, or where are you going to make up the difference?
Well, I think they're a little bit high this year just because there's going to be a transition period. So they're going to have to come in and learn about the way we do accounting here in the city, our processes, our policies and procedures. They're going to spend some time up front interviewing the staff and the city administrator, kind of learning about us. So I think they're accounting for that in their first year.
I understand it. That's,
yeah.
That's the what. I need to know the how. You're going to make up the difference.
Yeah, well,
There'll be savings, we'll have savings.
yeah, there'll be savings elsewhere. I don't think it's going to be the full $27,000, frankly. We'll kind of manage their time a little bit. So I think they'll probably kind of come below the $27,000, but that's a do not exceed price. So that's the maximum price. They can't charge us any more than that.
I totally understand the fiscal management. I just,
But if it
for
did go,
paperwork and record keeping, it looks like we have a budget of 25, and
Yeah,
right.
There'll be savings
So if it
elsewhere in
went
the budget.
27, the other two would come out of the general fund.
Yeah. There'll be savings elsewhere in the budget, so that's not a concern.
How long does it normally take them? Is it a month-long process to?
Yeah, it's probably more about a 3-month-long process. Yeah.
Not like continuous.
It's not
Not
continuous.
on site for
Not
3 months,
continuous
no.
on site.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, but we'll get started in December with pre-audit work, field work. They'll give us a list of things that they're looking for. We'll gather that information. They'll actually come on site for a few days, do sample work, kind of gather all that together. Then come back probably, last year was February, kind of end of February, right around that time period, to actually do the audit itself. That could be the time they'll be here about 2 weeks or so for that.
So you do a 3-year contract with an option for a 4th year if you want it?
Well, this would be a 4-year contract with an option to renew every year if they do quality product for us. So we're going to evaluate them at the end of each year. If we find that the work's acceptable and we're pleased with it, we'll come back the next year with a renewal contract for you all to listen to.
So what were some of the concerns with Monty's housing? What's the, I guess, push to change that?
There's no concerns with them. I think it's a good practice to have a fresh set of eyes come in every few years and look at the books. I think they were probably a little bit too familiar with us, a little bit too familiar with some of our practices and our policies. And I think it's good to have somebody else come in, a fresh set of eyes, not only to look at the financial statements, but to look at our internal controls, our policies, our practices, maybe suggest best practices or something they've seen somewhere else.
We almost made a switch in I think the last time we went through this was in 2013, and kind of one of the deciding factors, and I think that Burbridge Tran and Company were number 2, or they were close in the mix last time, was that we had budgeted for a replacement of the financial management software in 2014, and we thought there might be some benefit to having that consistency in that transition year. But at this point, you know, that we've got it budgeted again for 2018, but I think Brian's absolutely right. They've been with us for 15 years. They've done great work for us, but it'll be nice to have a different set of eyes and opinions and best practices and those kinds of things brought to us.
It's funny they hit almost the nail on the head and how much we would allow for too. They must have seen all the records of how much. Yeah.
Well, they do their homework.
In terms of MICE housing, you mean, or, yeah, well, they've been with us for a total of 15 years, so they know how much it costs to actually do an audit for us. So. Emily Sheldon with Burbridge and Tehran, I gotta learn to pronounce that. She's here tonight if you have any questions for either one of us. The staff's recommendation would be to select them and enter into an engagement letter to begin the audit process, to audit the books for this fiscal year. They'll be ending December 31st.
So do we need a recommendation to take that, council?
I have a question first, please. So will there be a pre-engagement presentation by the auditors and then a post-engagement presentation of results? Is that?
We are planning just for the post-engagement. We can do a pre-engagement if you like.
I thought auditing standards dictated a pre-engagement presentation for governing body. Is that not?
Yeah, we've never done that before.
There's a letter, but not a presentation.
A letter?
Okay.
So, what do you think?
Yeah.
Not considered. Somebody recommend that?
I think
I think Pat did, and I think Debbie said yes,
Okay.
or I
But
don't
not
know,
on
not on
consent.
consent.
Thank you, sorry.
All right, thank you.
Next up on the agenda, we have an update on the classification and comp implementation.
One day we'll be finished talking about all of this, I hope. So following your approval of the initial classification compensation recommendation back in August, I sat down again with our consultants with the Austin Peters Group and began really working through those specific recommendations on an employee-by-employee basis and looking at how we would then transition that across our implementation timeframe. The proposal that we brought forward and that our recommendations were based on the employees that were in the positions kind of in an late April, early May timeframe. What we realized very quickly as we started going through that on an individual basis was that we've had enough turnover in many of those positions that it looked like for about $23,000 additional dollars we could get further in implementing a full market compression adjustment for a larger number of employees. And as we went through the process and presented the initial recommendations, we adopted our compensation philosophy saying we wanted to target at being at about the 60th percentile of the market. We adjusted our ranges to accomplish that. And then we were looking at how far could we push employees into those ranges based on their tenure and their position. And a combination of performance evaluation scores. And that really became kind of a dollars and cents calculation. So we had brought forward that original proposal of about $103,000. But as we looked at it, as I said, for an additional $23,000, we can make that push further, and we actually get 30 of the 44 employees who would be impacted by this study, 100% of the recommended market compression adjustment through the study, so we won't have to sort of come back next year. We were knowing we would have to come back next year to look at maybe some minor adjustments. This helps reduce that number. So I tried to provide in the action item in my memo just a breakdown, obviously not sharing individual employee data again, but I wanted to be able to illustrate a little more clearly than we were able to with the initial presentation, sort of how that impacted employees across the various departments and employees kind of in the salary grades in that process. So if you look at, we have implemented the first step of the process, which was to adopt the new salary ranges and then move any employee who fell below those new range minimums to that range minimum. That ended up impacting 14 employees, and those moves were made with the September 22nd payroll, and those moves were communicated to the employees. So if you look at, and you may recall it was about $29,000 to accomplish that. And all of these numbers, the $23,000, $29,000, are on an annual basis. So of that budget, about 39% of that went to employees in the police department to make those minimum adjustments, impacting 4 of 27. There were none in court, 6 out of 10 in the public works department, That was probably, obviously, the department impacted the greatest number of employees with about 38% of that total budget. Only 1 in the administration department, 1 in community development, and 2 in parks and recreation. That next step, which we had originally thought we would implement with this Friday's payroll, again, I put on hold and to take the opportunity after visiting as a leadership team and then individually with each department director as we reviewed kind of the individual impacts for each of their staff members and employees. I said, you know, I would like to take the opportunity to go back. I think we have the resources available to us in the 2017 and the 2018 budget to go ahead and implement this additional push now. Again, kind of going back, our goal is to get as employees as close to that market target as we can, but we have to look at that and balance that financial impact both in the short and the long term. So overall, when we made the first initial recommendation, it was going to take about $103,000 to make those market compression adjustments, and for an additional $23,000, as I mentioned, we could provide 30 employees with 100% of their market compression adjustment and move the other 14 closer to their market targets than we had originally anticipated. There will be 17 employees throughout the organization who do not receive any increase as a result of the classification and compensation study, and that may be as a result of they were hired in, their initial starting salaries were reflective or kept them more competitive with that market compression adjustment or a variety of reasons. So there are 17 people who won't see this. They will be eligible for their annual merit increases, which will also take place in October and November. One of the other things that we looked at was capping those market adjustments at about a 10% increase. That seemed to be a pretty healthy salary increase for employees. When you think about the fact that they will also be eligible for merit increases, that could be up to 13, as high as 14% by the end of this year. So there are 17 employees whose adjustments are 10%. Some were capped, some just naturally fell in that 10% range. So that was the other thing that sort of helped kind of control the longer term costs and helps keep us a little more equalized and deal with internal equity issues as well. So if I look at then how with the additional dollars that are recommended of how those annual base wage impacts are distributed by departments, you can see again, police department is getting of that total budget allocation about 59%, with 93% of the employees, or 25 out of 27 impacted. Court, 6%, or 100% of the employees in court, about 60% of the employees in the Public Works Department, 2 out of 7 or 29% in administration, and I tried to provide you the percentage, but then also that number of employees impacted because it helps to tell the story a little bit more clearly. So market compression adjustments impact a total of 44 of our 61 employees that were included as a part of this, or 72%. That were currently eligible for consideration. I also then tried to break it out and look at, in addition to how the dollars were allocated across the departments, how were they allocated across our salary ranges. And so that last table really just tried to break down, and I think demonstrates really nicely one of my goals, I know, at least going into the study, was that ensuring that our frontline employees really benefit as a result of the classification and compensation study. So when you look at pay grades 10 through 15, so we have a pay scale that goes from a grade 10 to a grade 32, I believe. So you can see that about 48% of the employees in those lower pay grades are going to receive some type of market adjustment as a result of this. Again, I have looked at and reviewed our performance in the general fund. Revenues and expenses are both tracking extremely well this year, which is good news all the way around. So I would like to just respectfully request the ability to be able to make this additional push later this month and get closer to that goal.
Laura, could you tell me how many vacancies we have in each department right now, please? Do you know that, or you could send us an email?
Sure, we have, well, the chief can help me. Your number is probably the one that fluctuates the most. You have
We have 4 right now.
4.
Maybe another 2.
4 and
All FTEs, right?
yes. So we have a total of 69, I think 69 employees, full FTEs budgeted in this year, next year's budget. The court has 1 vacancy. Parks and Recreation, you have 1 vacancy. Public Works, you have 1 or 2? 1. Yep. Administration has none. Community Development has none.
Do we know what the total amount was, maybe I missed it here, if we wanted to try to push it all the way up to take care of the market adjustment for all 44 people?
Well, when we looked at it before, we were in, and that's why it wasn't part of the recommendation initially, it was closer to $200,000. So it grows pretty significantly, so I think we would have to add another, probably close to $75,000 to make that last push. And again, part of that is though, I don't know that I would be 100% comfortable recommending that because of how dramatic some of those increases are, and I think we create some internal equity concerns and problems with that. But that's kind of that number that we would be looking at.
Well, these adjustments that we're making, in total here, will that get us up to the 65th percentile, or?
Well, it will get, yes, so it will get, our ranges are now, so our salary ranges are competing at the 60th percentile of the market, and then we will have 30 of those 40 of our 61 employees who will be where they should be then within that 60th percentile based on the time and experience that they have in their current position.
Okay. But I thought our goal was supposed to be 40%.
And we started at about 40%,
Oh, okay.
and we're trying to get, and we are making the move to 60%.
Trying to get it lower. Yeah, I think it's something we should do, need to do, and I'm going to recommend we take it.
Let's go. Good.
You guys say not consent?
I'm going to say not consent.
Great.
Cool. Are there any other department updates?
Just 2 very quickly. The first one is, if you call Lathrop Engage and ask for Pete Heaven, they'll tell you he no longer works there. He has transitioned to the firm of Spencer Fain as of the end of September. It all transpired very quickly in the last couple of weeks. His first day at Spencer Fain was this past Monday. So I will distribute his contact information, but that does have a couple of impacts and decisions that we'll need to make. And so rather than bringing it through committee, because we've just been sort of talking about it with his final transition. So Pete, we appoint Lathrop Engage as our land use attorneys each year as one of our annual appointments. They also are working and have been representing us throughout the course of the tough litigation. So we have some options and decisions, and I just received a letter from Lathrop Engage asking what the city wants to do in terms of having work follow Pete, and they will not oppose that, or leaving work with their law firm. And talking sort of briefly with the mayor, I know my recommendation, and I believe he concurs, would be to recommend that we transfer our land use work with Pete to Spencer Fain, which would include support of the Planning Commission, as well as the work on the development projects that we've had, and that we do that through the end of 2018. We go through a similar process with land use attorneys, or we have in the past, RFQ process, as we do with auditors and some of those other firms. And we would be due, we're actually due to go through that process again for land use attorneys, but I'd like to get us far enough out. I'm afraid if we set December 31st this year, there still may be some carryover on development issues and projects, so I'd like to set that out to December of 2018 with a commitment to go through that RFQ process in the fall of 2018.
Do you need to get an approval from Spencer Fain that he can do that?
He can.
No.
We have that, and we have the approval of Lathrop Engage, so Lathrop Engage would not oppose any of their firm's current work going with him. And then we would recommend leaving the tough litigation with Lathrop Engage. So I'll be working up kind of a specific recommendation which will appear as a new business item on the October 18th agenda so we can deal with that housekeeping. The announcement wasn't public for us to take care of that at our September meeting, and again, his transition. So I will send out his new contact information, email and mail and phone number and all of that, but that is one piece of that. So I think a good opportunity for him, but big change. And then, as you know, we have not yet been served formally with the petition, but there has been a petition initiating a class action suit on the transportation utility fee in district court. We don't have, again, we haven't been served yet, so we have plenty of time to respond and think about that. But
so Pete's done all the back work on that. So you would take that away and leave that with
he would. Well, Tom Murray and Mark Samsel really have taken most of that. He was involved with sort of the research and the investigation on that front end. We're really at a point now, which is a different set of legal issues in terms of the repayment. And Pete will make himself available to answer, obviously, Tom and Mark's questions. And I did speak with Tom Murray earlier this week. They do have two individuals in, Lathrop and Gage does have two individuals in their Kansas City office who are experts in class action litigation, so they feel like they have that ability in-house. Can be, as I understand it, somewhat unique. So we're bringing that recommendation forward on the 18th. And then that's all I have.
Great. Any other discussion items?
Can I just mention something?
Sure.
I would just like to say thank you to all of you who rallied around the Rushton couple and family. They settled in Mission with nothing but just a sofa, and now they have new bunk beds, they have new mattresses, they have a new single bed and mattresses, and they have blankets, and they have sheets, and they have a new table with chairs. They don't have to eat on the floor. They have dishes, they have silverware, they have pots and pans. They're ready to go. So thank you to all of you who helped. It's great.
Anything else? If not, I think we can call this session closed. Thank you.
Martha.
Oh, you're welcome.
Switch it to my name, but I never heard back, so maybe easy.
I know, they're pretty good.
He's doing okay.
They said they can't. That's the reason why.
So yeah, I forgot that was just that I didn't realize that you guys at the campus were talking to us.
And he was one too.
So yeah, who's going, when's the next, when's the forum?
That's $1.
The 10th? Okay.
They're saying that the bank finance is going to
It's our job, right?
Yeah, they have to.
Even the person working is who Western people
We know they're gonna ask for sales tax.
So I think you call
We want to be able
So I was talking to them, so Sarah, I heard one person.
just make sure that when we do get to a point that we.
My question is, what is that structural remarrying? There's the signs.
I don't know, but you know, we would have to. I
Right.
mean, but you know,
We've,
if it starts to rain, they have to plug something.
I want to recommend to this
If
body.
it rains, they have to do something for fixer
Sales
trucks.
tax.
It's just, they say,
To get on the
oops, sorry. Oh, excuse me.
You really feel like
Anyway,
we've pushed through stuff
I just put
now.
Maryland's because they've got.
I got there on Monday.
It's a whole different.
Sat in my office for a little while, and then I decided to start walking down the hall. When I came up on the first floor, I was like, oh.